Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for being with us. With the rising popularity of Amazon and ebooks in the late 90s and early aughts, many predicted the demise of the physical bookstore. When Borders Books and Music declared bankruptcy in 2011, that seemed all but guaranteed. But fast forward to present day, and the brick-and-mortar bookstore business is actually growing. According to the American Booksellers Association, 323 bookstores opened last year. That's up 31% from the year before. So what's driving this resurgence? In our increasingly digital era, are we just looking to literally get our hands on more physical media? Instead of reading online reviews, do we yearn for a real-life bookworm standing behind a counter to give us a recommendation on what to read next? To try to answer these questions, we kick off today's show talking to a few people running bookstores here in Northeast Ohio. Then, staying with books, stick around for later when we mark the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald with the author of a brand new book, which is about how the history impacts what we see going on today. First, with me to talk about bookstores in general, we've got Manuel Chinchilla, the owner of Hexacon Books in Cleveland Heights. Hi, Manuel.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Stephanie.
We also have L.S. Quinn, who is the executive director of the Reading Room CLE, a new shop over in Cleveland's Cam Corners neighborhood. Quinn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
And we have Dave Ferrante. He's the owner of Visible Voice Books, which opens a new space in Ohio City this week. Dave, thank you for being here on The Sound of Ideas.
Hello, and I appreciate the invite.
Now, if you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. Maybe you've got a favorite shop that you want to shout out. Maybe you've seen a new bookstore open in your neighborhood. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram. We are at The Sound of Ideas. All right, first I will talk with Dave. Dave, thank you very much for being with us. And I want to start with you because it's interesting that Visible Voice is preparing to open a new space, much bigger than the last shop, which was in Tremont. So tell us about business growing over the past few years and why the need for the bigger space.
Well, originally I started in 2007, and I was on Kenilworth Avenue in Tremont. And the reason why I did that is I kind of always been into literature, and I kind of saw the fact that the brick and mortar stores were a little bit on their demise. There are a few really good stores in Cleveland, such as Max Packs, but I felt that not only could I satisfy a need in the community, but I also could kind of plant a flag in the neighborhood and say, this might actually also help the neighborhood and kind of move on with the retail aspect of things for the neighborhood and try to build it up a little bit and satisfy my own interests also.
Sure. Now, Quinn, I want to ask you in general, do you feel like the physical bookstore is having a resurgence right now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people need spaces to be human, and that's what bookstores are. A bookstore is a place to go and to experience people's lives that aren't you. It's a place where you can go and hear about someone's life that they're not physically present in your city or in your time period. It's hundreds of years ago or hundreds of years in the future, and everyone wants more of that. And everyone wants a place to be with other people who want to practice that kind of empathy.
There is something to be said, just personally. I'll share an anecdote. I love walking into a bookstore and happening upon a book. I used to do that all the time when I lived in New York. There was a bookstore that had a new novelist section, and I would walk up to that section. And I was often surprised at how many Ohio references I would find in those books. So that was something that I particularly enjoyed about a physical bookstore. Manuel, I'll ask you, you've gone from a former tenured university professor and high school teacher to now a bookstore owner. So why did you make that move?
Well, I studied literature, and I always, especially when I lived in Ann Arbor, I went to school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. It's still now. The Borders, the chain started there, and it was really sad when it closed. They had a big store on State Street. I just loved kind of the culture, how many bookstores we had, how many niche bookstores. Ann Arbor still has, for example, a big bookstore that just specializes in comics. And then you have highbrow literature bookstores and so on. I was, mid-40s thinking about doing something else. And I thought about opening the bookstore and kind of bringing my two passions, which are, language teaching, literature, and especially foreign literature and minority authors, which is what the store does.
Dave, I'll ask you, Visible Voice first opened back in 2007. Now you're on the precipice of sort of a new era for Visible Voice. When that was first happening, though, were you worried about the popularity of online book sales and digital media sales of books in terms of opening that store?
Not till I opened the door the first day and only 6 people came in. I said, "Oh man, this is going to be tough," and you keep working it. And you mentioned Borders and even Barnes and Noble. 60% of the revenue comes from other items other than books, so they're not essentially totally focused on of books. So I learned really early that you had to hustle, and the books is always the primary way you have to go to build it because that's what it's all about, keeping the flame alive. But, we have a cafe now. We've got Trey Kirchhoff, who's the cafe manager, who has a long history in the coffee business. We have a stage that we unearthed that goes back 80 years, and we're going to do a lot of performances there, whether it's creative performances or book authors or roots music or any kind of music. So the books are always going to be our main way to go, but at the same time, you've got to allow for different diversification and bring more people in and build a community, and also allow for that serendipitous discovery that you were referring to early.
Yeah, walking through those different aisles and maybe seeing what sparks your interest. And it sounds like you're really talking about creating an experience in the store.
A community, a swirling level of experience that you come in maybe for a coffee, you find out we have an event, you stay for the event, then you start browsing around, you find a book, and then you're hooked. And that's the idea what we're trying to do here.
Quinn, let me ask you about the model of the Reading Room CLE. It's a nonprofit bookstore, so tell us a bit about how it operates.
Sure. So this is a national model that's used all over the country. We accept donated used books and we sell them to fund our programs. We do focus mostly on literary and literacy programs, but our general mission is actually anti-segregationist. So literary and literacy work is sort of an easy wedge to get started on undoing the damage that segregation has done to our schools and to our communities and to our country. But as a nonprofit, a lot of what we do is actually capacity building services for groups of volunteers that aren't yet nonprofits. It's called fiscal sponsorship, and that is, like we said, we all have different line items in our income. We sell books, we sell gifts, we do events, and then we also have these capacity building services, which we offer a richer suite of benefits to our sponsees at a lower price than most of my colleagues do. And that is part of our income as well.
So let's talk about the timeline for you. COVID played a part in the opening of your store.
It did. On average, it takes 3 years to open a bookstore. So if we incorporated in fall 2018, I had been unofficially accepting gifts of books since February 2018, but we incorporated in October 2018, and that would have had us opening, sometime in the summer of 2021? I mean, nobody was opening physical bookstores in the summer of 2021. So we just kind of doubled down on our nonprofit administration work as a bunch of volunteers all working remotely in our homes in that distributed way, and we kept going and we waited for the time to be right. And so it was 8 years, and so we opened with a much larger backlog of inventory than we might have if we'd only had 3 years to collect inventory. And we also opened with a much stronger administrative backbone than most bookstores or most nonprofits would have opened with. I think it's a little bit atypical about us that, like, if I'm employee number one, I mean, we're all volunteers, but if I'm number one, number two was a user experience designer, and then number three is a black belt project manager, which is like not the typical way that you start a bookstore or a nonprofit.
Yeah, what a varied amount of experience you have there. Now, Manuel, talk to me about the mission of Hexicon Books. That's a unique angle there. You mentioned your focus on language and literacy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an immigrant, came to the States to study here when I was 19, and I was interested in having a space, which is kind of crazy, right? It's hard to sell books already, but I wanted a space where I could sell multilingual books and books in the languages that are taught at the store. So there are books in the original language for French, Spanish, and Italian, and there are some other books, we don't have a lot, but Russian, Polish, Chinese, Japanese. And I did manage to carry that through with the kids section and the poetry section. Poetry books are easier to print with facing pages, so most of the books in the poetry section have English and another language. And the kids section is entirely like that. Most of the books are multilingual or by or about minorities. And yeah, I was surprised by how well it took off. People do want that. It's amazing how many, for example, Spanish speakers and Italian speakers are around, even native speakers who live in Cleveland or in the suburbs or in Cleveland Heights. And it makes the store distinct right away. And it also kind of, I think, pushes for the aspects that indie stores do well, which are, what Dave and Quinn were saying about building community. And I think that's the one thing that the store has done extremely well in just 1 year that it's been in existence, that it's really a hub for a certain kind of reader and a certain kind of people.
So we've got kind of a variety of levels of time open. Visible Voice opened in 2007, a couple years ago for the Reading Room CLE, and then Hexagon Books a year now. So a lot of variety there. So when do you feel like, maybe this is a question best for Dave, when did you feel like you were like, okay, we're here, we're established, we're not going anywhere? Or is there still some uncertainty there?
I used to go Tremont at an art festival every year in the summer, and I would get a booth and I would hand out flyers to say, hey, this is the bookstore. The first 2 years, everyone's like, Visible Voice, are you doing audiobooks? I'm like, no. By the third year, I didn't have to hand them out anymore. They're like, oh, you don't have to hand me this. I know who you are. It's a lot of hustle. It'd be nice to just be able to just worry about the books and the inventory, which is obviously key. But the bigger, larger corporate bookstores are able to pay large rents, get into areas that have massive populations. We can't do that. So the hardest thing to do is really to get the word out using any way you can to do it.
Well, we definitely appreciate each of you being here today. We have an email in from Leslie now who wants to shout out a bookshop. Leslie says, please shout out new independent woman-owned by two sisters bookstore in Bath, Ohio. She says they're building community with bookstores that also has craft nights. And lines were out the door on opening weekend. That's nice to hear. It's Woven Words Bookshop. So that website is wovenwordsbookshop.com. That's in Bath. I want to remind everyone that we are talking about what it seems to be the resurgence of the physical bookstore here in Northeast Ohio and around the country. If you have a question or a comment, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. Now, we got a question in, or more of a comment in from Marvin as well. Marvin says, I know of a pop-up bookstore that started up about a year ago, but they're now out of business. It was in another state, so it may be different here, but businesses opening doesn't mean success. I sincerely hope they do succeed, though. I'm a big supporter of small business and independent authors. And I'll start with you, Manuel, since you have the newest bookstore on this panel. How much of that do you see from your colleagues in the business? We're seeing new bookstores open. Is there longevity?
I mean, I think so. On the side, like finance, if I give advice on finances, I think things could go bad. Like I wanted my store. I took money out of my retirement pension. I did it. I didn't sit across a banker who was going to roll their eyes at me. But I also understand why there's trepidation and yeah, businesses do fail sometimes. I can talk about the other side because I've only been at it for a year. Like I'm still trying to see if this carries through. I hope it will, and it's doing well so far. But the other side is there. People do want these spaces. People want places where they can gather with others. The books are the main thing, but like Dave was saying, there are other things happening. Like I've been surprised by how many people want to do things at the store for free. I had a Halloween party and a friend played music, and everybody supported me. That big sign that I have over the store, my friend Dean Rank, who's a movie set designer, made that sign and came and put it up with me. So these people buy into the store because it genuinely gives something back to the community and the neighborhoods. And there's a craving for this kind of space that is neither work nor family. I met all kinds of people just by opening the store. When we had the anniversary party, my girlfriend asked me, like, how many of these people did you know before you opened the store? And it was only like 10, and 80 people came to the anniversary party. So I can't talk too much. Maybe Dave and Quinn can do that better about, the finances and the longevity, especially because it's only been a year. But I can tell you on the other side, people do want these spaces and they're willing to support them, not just monetarily, but in very personal and human ways.
Yeah, So we opened officially on August 1st. We had our soft launch from June through the end of July, and then we opened officially on August 1st. And by my back of the napkin math, I have met 1,500 new people in the past 3 months through the bookstore, which is wonderful and overwhelming. But I think people are really hungry for these spaces. They are really eager to support them. But there's also, I think, anytime a small business, especially with bookstores for some reason, if a small business closes, people see that not just as a failure, which it isn't always, but also as the failure of an industry. As we were looking for our new space, Appletree was closing. And of course, I'm devastated that the community has lost Appletree, but at the same time, people are allowed to retire. These are small businesses. They're owned by individuals. If the three of us find someone to pass our work on to, that is, of course, desirable. Like, I'm not the owner of the reading room, right? I'm the executive director, and we have a talent pipeline to get a replacement for me by the time I'm ready to leave. I'm sure my colleagues are also doing that. But just the fact that a small business closes does not mean an industry has failed. It means that small business, that person's child doesn't want to be a bookseller, which is fine. You're allowed to do something else. One of my colleagues, their kid is incredibly talented and good at bookselling, but much more talented at opera and has moved on to a career in the opera. I would never tell someone, you have to be a bookseller because I'm a bookseller.
See, when people interview for a job at Visible Voice Books, I'm like, look, you're just going to be sitting there and just putting books on a shelf. When you open a bookstore, you've got to wear a lot of different hats, and financials are very important. And if you've got to be able to do a little balance at all, and you got to be able to rely. And in my case, I've got a really good staff. I'm just going to shout out to Abby Robisak, Aaron Williams, who's brand new, Aaron and Isaac. You guys are great. I couldn't do it without them because I can't think of everything. I've got to rely on what they're seeing out there so I can make decisions and bounce stuff back and forth. So there's a level of business acumen that comes with this. You can't just be like, oh, let's open a bookstore and let's go to town. So I think sometimes when they fail, they're undercapitalized, or they may not just have enough skill set to make it happen the right way.
Yeah, I get a lot of people asking if I'm hiring clerks, and the answer is I don't hire clerks. I don't ever intend to hire clerks. I hire nonprofit administrative professionals who are also willing to work the shop floor, which is a weird skill set, right? That I need somebody who's willing to do program management and also wait on customers. But at the same time, I'm never looking to hire someone that I can pay minimum wage to just be a book jockey. We're trying to get some work done here.
You got to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
We have a call now from VJ in Shaker. VJ, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Welcome, Jenny. I'm Stephanie. Salam. Splendid to hear about all these bookstores. In addition to libraries, bookstores are part of a burgeoning literary community here in Northeast Ohio. I visited a recent bookstore at the Galleria. Remember the Galleria? All those years ago. There seems to be some signs of life there. And I want to praise Third Space Reading Room in Glenville. Thank you.
Thank you very much for calling in, VJ. We appreciate it. We have another bookstore shout out coming in from CJ over email. The Learned Owl, CJ says, that's in downtown Hudson, has been in business for at least 50 years and it's thriving. They have a great kids section, classic novels, and used records too. Thank you for letting us know about the Learned Owl, CJ, and bringing that into our conversation as we're talking about longevity. And as we talk about just sort of what the ecosystem is like. Quinn, I want to ask you a question. You've talked to other owners and they've been mentoring you. We've talked a bit about the importance of financial numbers. So tell us about the mentoring you've experienced at the Reading Room CLE.
Oh, it is so helpful. So most of my background is in nonprofit leadership and administration, and that stuff, I know that part pretty well. But I haven't worked retail since I was a shop clerk in, high school and college. And so I have a couple of really very experienced booksellers who have been showing up to answer my questions. And every time I'm panicking, I'm looking at our runway and I'm looking at our income and I'm I'm afraid they're not going to cross. What are we going to do? Everything's going to fall apart. And they'll just look at me and be like, what did you think your sales would be like? You're doing great. This is, are you at the place where you want to be? No. But you're doing much better than you have any right to expect. So could you please stop complaining and just do your job? And that is really helpful to get that kind of reality check from people who are experienced in the business and know what's going on.
We have an email in now from Courtney. Courtney Morrow is the program director of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. And Courtney says, thanks for all you do to build a robust literary ecosystem in the greater Cleveland area, speaking to our panel here today. And now has a question for each of you. And this speaks to what we were talking about all of the things that go into a bookstore, creating that community space. So her question is, can you give a little bit of the behind the scenes of your book stock process? How are you deciding which books to put on the shelves and where to put them? And how do you go about deciding what events to have? And I'll start with Dave.
So the funnest part of the job is picking the books. The worst part of the job is actually having to pay for the books. But I'm always, wherever I go, I have an idea of kind of a narrative I want the store to have loosely. But I always say the success of our store is based on what our staff has in mind for books, what comes in used-wise, which is from our audience and our customers. So the result of our store is what I like in there, what our staff likes, and what our customers like. So it does truly reflect the community that we're in.
And how about for you, Manuel, at Hexagon Books?
Well, I don't have a staff, so it's just me, but everybody who walks through the door becomes a collaborator if they accept so. So, for example, I do invite people to curate shelves. One of the things that when we read foreign literature, we always mostly read highbrow literature. So one of the things I wanted to do at the store is to have genre fiction by international authors represented, romance, sci-fi, fantasy. But also, I happen not to be very knowledgeable about genre fiction. I read a lot of highbrow. So I invite people over to do that. And you write a bio about yourself as a reader, and you pick 5 books, and you write blurbs about it. So it's almost like what a normal person has a staff member does at a bookstore. And also, the best thing about the store, everybody who comes in, I get to have a conversation with them. And they oftentimes tell me, for example, we do a lot of horror at the store. I love your horror selection, and you should have these. And sometimes I'm the one who asks them, you like these, or I saw that you bought these 3 books. What else would you recommend I should have here? And they have great recommendations and books that I wouldn't have had at the store if it were just me picking them. And for the book clubs, we have one book club called By Side Sleep that is short books. And that book club is open in the sense that the members pick the next book. I don't curate it. I picked the first 3 when the book club was starting, and now everybody comes up with a book, and so you end up with books that are very diverse, and that fits into the store too.
And Quinn, how about for you with that book selection and event curation?
Yeah, so, I mean, unlike these two, I don't buy books. I just accept what I am given. We're sort of open to possibility. We just said we will take your books and bring them to us. And then our process is we have a curation crew that curates each book. And what we've done, because of the way we work, instead of making each of our shelves a genre, I've curated them to be a series of journeys that the reader can go on. So each shelf is a different journey. So, you walk in and you look at the inspo shelf, and that is about becoming a new person without leaving your house. And so it's hobbies, DIY, craft information, meditation, yoga, self-improvement is all on the inspo shelf. Whereas adventure is about being a new person by leaving your house. So that's like outdoorsmanship and travel, right? And so by curating the shelves in this way, what I hope is if someone goes to a shelf where they think they will find a specific book, they will probably not find that specific book, but they will find something that's to their liking. They will find something that will take them on the kind of journey that they're looking for. And that has gone really well for us. And we also have tried to be responsive to the community a little bit. I'm so excited to be in Cam's Corners, where we have a strong Irish American heritage component. We've just received a donation of Irish and Irish American literature, and I was so excited to be able to put that shelf together, right, because I'm getting those requests. So I hope I've answered your question.
I think you answered it beautifully, and thank you very much to Courtney for the question.
Oh, and thank you to Courtney. We have also received a donation of books from the Anisfield Wolf organization. Since our focus is representation of marginalized voices and voices that are hard for Clevelanders to access, that was really important to our process, and I'm so grateful for it.
I also think you hit a little bit on why people are doing more brick and mortar stores, because the individuality of them. You can go online and buy a book, and you can get the specific book you want. But if you want to be challenged just a little bit or moved outside your comfort zone, you can come into one of our stores, find what you want, but then also maybe be pushed into something a little bit different. That's not going to happen at a big corporate bookstore like Barnes & Nobles or online. We are all different and unique, but are very comfortable places to come.
Yeah, and I think that word comfort is really important. I've tried to make a place that is really comfortable and appealing for people's bodies so that they will be in a place where they're open to possibility and open to learning, right?
You have to. You got to make a unique spot that people want to come to, and then you got to get them when they're there.
Hook them in. Now, Quinn, you talked about the importance of being in the Cam's Corner area here in Cleveland. Manuel, I want to ask you, Hexagon is on Lee Road around plenty of other businesses, and you have hosted music there as part of the Heights Music Hop. So how intentional was that? How important is it for you to be connected in that neighborhood?
So I live on Delwood Road, 3 blocks away from my store. The neighborhood has a great library, a great independent theater, the Bama, a great movie theater, Cedar Lee, the Heights Arts Gallery. I mean, it's a great, great place for culture. I wish more people knew about it. And yeah, for me, I was debating between opening the store at the city or staying in Cleveland Heights. And I think from the beginning I knew that I was going to end up staying where I was because it is my neighborhood and I know everybody. I mean, there are people that I know just because they pass the store and I see them and they wave at me. The neighborhood is in, planning to become an arts district, and I think it has everything to do that. And it's just a great community. The city and the business owners and the building owners on the strip are trying to make it more of a venue that hosts lots of events and public events. And that's, I think, what I like the most. Even I'm probably getting off tangent because this is not going to hit on my bookstore. But, it's great to have events where everybody can go and when you can belong and be with others in public, where you're not a consumer or a customer, but just a member of the community. So the Music Hub is that. People come into the businesses. Many of them do not host usually music. We had a flamenco guitar player, and he was awesome, and people were there. I was worried that the store was too crowded, but they had fun, And I think we also need that when I think, like what Quinn was saying about, businesses, whether we need to think about of them as if they fail because they go out of business. I'm like on a different kind of world. Like to me, what I'm doing is building a culture of reading that has to do with opening yourself up, like Dave was saying, to other traditions, to other peoples, to other languages. And if the business fails in a few years, I don't think it can fail. Like it can fail financially, but I did something that brought something that wasn't there and that can exist and that brought people in. And I think where I am, that strip on the road with all of these businesses, where there are also a lot of ethnic restaurants too. That's the project there. Maybe no one has said it in these words, but that's what I feel the community there is doing. It's opening itself up to others.
I want to share an email now that we just received from Chaz. This is directed to Manuel. He says, just wanted to express my appreciation for Hexagon Books. Manuel is creating a beautiful community for those of us eager to understand and support other cultures, especially during this time of heightened fear around immigration. He creates a welcoming environment for those of us to be empathic towards our fellow humans. Some of my best friends in Cleveland have been found through his language classes. I'm excited for new people to get to experience Hexagon. So, Chaz, thank you very much for that note.
Thank you, Chaz. He needs to do his homework, too. He has class tomorrow evening.
All right, Chaz, do that homework. I want to ask you, Dave, about, you moved from Tremont to Ohio City, two very walkable neighborhoods. How does that play into the business for Visible Voice?
Well, I'm very well. I actually live in Tremont, and people in Tremont don't like to leave the bubble of Tremont, and I got a lot of heat over that, but it's actually 1.7 miles away. I've actually walked from my current bookstore to the new bookstore. And some people in Ohio City say Ohio City versus Tremont. I don't believe in any of that. We're too small of a city for those type of combinations taking place where people are saying what area is better than the other. I went to a spot where I was able to, after honing what I had a vision for 20 years, I wanted a cafe, I wanted a bigger selection of books, and I wanted to have a performance space. This is the only place I can find it, and I think it's going to be a win-win for everybody, and not only in those adjacent neighborhoods, but for the city of Cleveland, because I would like to add and play a small role in the social fabric of the city and make it more interesting for people to come to, and I think this will fulfill that goal of mine, and also sell more people an idea of reading more.
All right, I want to share a couple more emails that we received from Ren. Ren says, an enthusiastic shout out to Little Sparrow Bookshop and Lorraine, the owner, and says that they're very thankful to have an independent bookstore in North Canton. Loves the Learned Alan Hudson, of course, a little bit of a drive for Ren, and says Little Sparrow is really developing and settling into the community in a short period of time. We also just got an email in from Linda, which wants to shout out Logan Berry on Larchmere. Linda, thank you very much for that. Now, I'll ask you, each of you, before we close here, what do you think the future is for the brick and mortar bookstore? If you could just tell us very quickly, are you excited? Are you nervous, anxious? What do you think? I'll start with you, Quinn.
I think I wouldn't have opened a store this summer if I weren't excited about the future of brick and mortar bookstores. And every single day, someone walks into the bookstore and they stop right at the edge of the tile and the carpet at our front door. They stop in like mid-stride and they say, a bookstore. We've needed a bookstore. And then they walk around the store and they just drink it in, and and then they buy something, which is always good because we do need sales. But to have people in a neighborhood welcome a bookstore is probably the most magical experience of my life, and it's nothing but pure joy, this work, and I'm so looking forward to the future.
And for you, Manuel, how are you feeling?
I am really excited. My bookstore has only been open for a year. I keep doing new things and new people keep coming to the store. I feel like what I'm doing is very DIY and community based, and I don't see, I think that's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, and it's going to give more surprises to me about what the store can do and to the community about what it can give to them, and I think it's going to be great.
And Dave, with your grand opening coming up?
I think the environment's changed. Where 25 years ago, where a lot of independents were going to business for different reasons based on what the economy is facing now. I think the biggest demographic issues are, I have nothing wrong with sports, except I'm upset about the Browns, but sports and social media has played such a huge role in the last 20 or 30 years where people are, a lot of the time people were spending reading, spend more time doing different activities such as those two. Nothing wrong with either one of them, but I think that it's going to circle around and people are into more of an analog experience. And as the type of stores that we're all presenting today, it's a wonderful opportunity to come in and explore these places. And I think it'll be more positive as people realize they need to spend less time on their phones and less time with sports or other ideas, or just diversify their time a little bit more. And I think things will go that direction.
I want to thank you each for an interesting conversation today. That's all the time we have for our segment now. Dave Ferrante from Visible Voice, Quinn from the Reading Room CLE, and Manuel Chinchilla from Hexagon Books. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
Appreciate it.
We'll take a quick break now, and when we're back, we'll talk about the anniversary of the infamous shipwreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And interesting note here, Tom, who is coming on, just had an event on Saturday at Max Backs on Coventry, said it was a great event. Shout out to another good local bookshop. Tom is the author of the book we'll be talking about next. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. Shipwrecks in the Great Lakes are not uncommon. Historians and archaeologists have estimated that there have been more than 6,000 shipwrecks across Lakes Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. But perhaps none have captured the attention and the imagination quite like the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which went down 50 years ago today. 29 sailors lost their lives that day when the ship was caught in a storm on Lake Superior. The new book, Wrecked, The Edmund Fitzgerald and the Sinking of the American Economy, examines not only the tragedy of the ship sinking, but what it means in the larger context of economic change in the Great Lakes region. We have the author Tom Nelson with us now by phone, who is also the county executive of the Outagamie County in Wisconsin. Tom, welcome to The Sound of Ideas.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Now, if you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 578-0903. Maybe you're old enough to remember when the sinking happened, or maybe you have questions about it. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Tom, I know like many of us, you grew up hearing the Gordon Lightfoot song about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald on the radio. But there was another experience that actually sparked your interest in the shipwreck. Tell us about that.
Well, there's actually two. One, my trip to the Valley Cat Museum in Sault Ste. Marie. I was about 7 years old, and going to the Fitzgerald exhibit, and specifically as a 7-year-old, maybe 4 feet tall, walking up to the lifeboat that they have on display. And of course, lifeboat is just kind of pulled apart along the stern, as if a large can opener had just ripped it open. And from my size, it just looked like the shark was trying to engulf me, just to chew me up. And so that sat with me for years. But as you mentioned, being county executive in Outagamie County, before that as a state legislator, and taking an interest in economic issues, labor studies, and so forth, I couldn't help but put two and two together, that the Fitzgerald was more than a tragedy, it was more than a shipwreck, but a vehicle that literally and figuratively built the American economy. And so my book is specifically about that legacy. And also in researching the legacy and writing this book, I also found what I think to be a very compelling theory why it sank in the first place.
We'll be getting into that in just a moment. I do want to ask you a little bit more about the framing and the context of the economic piece of the Great Lake region in the mid-70s. You could have framed this book in a lot of ways. So why did you choose to frame it that way?
Well, I think because it was an original approach to it. No one had written about it. I think it matched my interest and my experience well. And so when I did a tour in Cleveland and Toledo and a few other places, and I was talking about this and explaining the concept and some of the research, the evidence, the interviews that I conducted and dug up, people are like, wait. This stuff goes back to 1977, for the example of the Red Bergner deposition. Why haven't we heard about this? And I think most people who have been attracted to the Fitzgerald, who have written about the Fitzgerald, are people who are attracted to shipwrecks and maritime history. And so they've been asking one set of questions. With the economic and political background that I have, I've been asking an entirely different set of questions. And so that led me into a much different direction, and the result of which is this book.
A main premise of the book is that the Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't really seaworthy in 1975 when it sank, and it launched in 1958. And when that happened, it was the largest ship on the Great Lakes. So tell us a little bit, how did things evolve between the launch in 1958 and then the sinking in 75, and how you came to the conclusion that it wasn't safe to be on the water when it went down?
Well, based on my interviews and my research, there were several problems. From the very beginning, the design was faulty, that it took the design of a smaller ship and basically elongated it. And you don't take, for example, a civil engineer doesn't take a design for a 30-foot long bridge and elongate it to 50 feet. Like, that just doesn't happen because it's not sound structurally. Over the course of the Fitzgerald life, things started kind of falling apart, and in particular, the keel. And in its latter years, the keel, which should have been rebuilt or replaced, was simply patched together, tack welded, with pieces of steel. And there is a deposition that was conducted in 1977 that makes that very, very clear. And in that setting, the companies did not necessarily contest that conclusion. And one of the reasons why the ship was ill-maintained, so it's one thing to say there's evidence that it was ill-maintained, but then the question is, why was it ill-maintained? There were 4 ore ships on Lake Superior that night. There was the Fitzgerald. In addition to Fitzgerald, there was the Anderson, the Sykes, and the Ford. What the latter 3 have in common is that they were owner-operator. So those are vertically integrated companies, Ford, U.S. Steel, and then Inland Steel. And with the example of the Fitzgerald, it was not integrated. It was not owner-operator. There was Northwestern Mutual that built the ship, paid for it, and then there was Ogle Bay Norton that operated it. In other words, the Fitzgerald was a rental.
We have a call now from John from Lima who has something he'd like to add to the conversation about the Anderson. John, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just found fascinating about the captain of the Anderson, which I guess was ahead of the Edmund Fitzgerald when it went down. And the captain of the Anderson had 40-plus years of ocean experience. He'd been in the Indian Ocean and around the world. And what he said was that he had never seen a storm as fierce as what come upon Lake Superior that day.
Thank you for the comment, John. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that storm was a force to reckon with. And John is exactly right, that it was a storm that I think for people that had been on the lake before, at least recently around that time, in contemporary times, that it seemed like it was unprecedented. With the example of the Anderson left that night unscathed. The Anderson was approximately 10 miles behind the Fitzgerald. Now, any ordinary lake, if two boats are separated by 10 miles, I mean, that's 10 miles. That's a long distance. But when you're talking about the second largest lake in the world, 10 miles apart, they're basically on top of each other, experiencing the same weather and the same effects of the weather. One goes down and the other one does not. Now, there are a number of control variables, but one thing is clear is the Anderson was well kept. The Anderson was owned and operated by the same company, and the Anderson today still plies the Great Lakes, despite the Fitzgerald going down 50 years ago. So John makes a really good point. Yes, the weather was a factor, but I contend that if it wasn't on the night of November 10th, 1975, it was only a matter of time before the Fitzgerald would in fact still sink.
Tom, let's talk about what happened on November 10th in 1975. We know we talked about the storm that day. So what can you tell us about the direct ruling of the cause of the shipwreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Well, that's the problem with this, is that there was never a direct ruling. And from the very beginning, and this was a clear signal to the people interested in this, especially the families affected by it, that this was going to be a political football, because there were two main reports by the Coast Guard and the NTSB. They were in conflict with each other and both discounted each other's respective report. And so there really wasn't anything clear about that. Meanwhile, you have later that year, 1976, you have Gordon Lightfoot coming out with his song. And in his song, it speaks to the main hatches giving way. And so the hatch theory persisted for 4 years. In 1980, when Jacques Cousteau's son, when his team dove the Fitzgerald for like all of 30 minutes because the battery power went out on the submersible vehicle, he had said, well, it was, it broke apart at the surface and it was because of the hatches. So there was even more disagreement within the community, and that maintained for another 9 years until it was dove again. So for years and years, there has never been anything conclusive saying why it sank. And I think that's the reason that attracts people to this issue, because it remains a mystery, because there hasn't been anything officially concluded from the wreckage.
I want to remind our audience that we're talking about the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Our guest is Tom Nelson. He's the author of Wrecked, The Edmund Fitzgerald and the Sinking of the American Economy. That's a new book that's out now. If you have a question or a comment, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Tom, in the book, you talk about the profit-driven nature of shipping on the Great Lakes in the 70s. So what kind of blame do you put on the shipping companies that operated ships like the Fitzgerald at that time?
Well, I'll say two things. One, to put things in context, how the shipping industry operated in the 1970s was not unlike any other manufacturing industry, be it the paper industry, auto industry, steel industry. There was an incredible amount of foreign competition, and there was a reckoning happening within manufacturing in general. So I think that companies were really hamstrung and that there was remarkable competition domestically as well as foreign. But look, these companies were in the business of making money, okay? OSHA was established 1973, 1974, so right before the Fitzgerald went down, but too little, too late. And so focusing on worker protections, the U.S. government shoring up, so to speak, industry that had fallen on hard times, that was losing out to foreign competition because the U.S. government still did not have, and still does not today, by the way, have a national industrial strategy. These companies were really hamstrung. But specifically focusing on Ogilvy Norton, their business model was different than other shipping companies, shipping, steel, and manufacturing companies, especially compared to the other three ore ships that were on the lake. So I would say two things. One, Ogilvy Norton was not exceptional in this regard, but they clearly cut corners that really set things in motion that the Fitzgerald would ultimately meet its demise on Lake Superior.
Now, Tom, you talked with a lot of people as you were preparing to write the book Wrecked. So tell us about some of the people you interviewed for it and how those voices helped paint a more complete picture of what actually happened with the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Well, first of all, despite the fact that this story is 50 years old, I interviewed a lot of people that no one bothered to interview before. I asked interview subjects questions that had never been asked before. The three attorneys I interviewed, plus a law firm investigator, painted a picture that was much different than a narrative that has persisted over the years. So I'd like to think that I gave those people a voice, gave them space to be able to tell their story. And in telling their story, revealing facts, revealing information, and taken together, I would say, a compelling theory about the underlying cause of why the Fitzgerald sank.
We have a call now from Kelly in Aurora. Kelly, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hi, I lived in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the night of the storm. I'm a Coast Guard brat. My father was in the Coast Guard and the Life Saving Service, and I just wanted to make a comment about that night. It was truly one of the worst storms I have ever been in or that any of my group had seen. It was so bad that windows were imploding along the street. My friend who lived in the country had a ladder go through his window, and we didn't know the ship went down until the next morning when we went to a local restaurant, and it was full of rescue people, and that's how we found out that the Fitzgerald went down.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Kelly. We appreciate you sharing that first-person perspective of the experience of the storm that night. Tom, I'll ask you before we wrap things up here. We are the NPR member station coming out of Cleveland here on the Sound of Ideas. So can you tell us about the Ohio connection specifically? Had the Edmund Fitzgerald docked in many Ohio ports, and were there any Ohio sailors on board when it went down?
Most of the sailors were, in fact, from, or I should say, of all the states represented, I think Ohio was number 2 or number 3, perhaps number 1 as well. When I was in Ohio over the weekend, I was struck just how engaged people were in general on this topic. And it wasn't just because that was my focus doing these book talks, though. It was almost like the anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald was practically a national holiday. The nickname of the Fitzgerald, and it had several, was the Toledo Express because its route was Silver Bay, Minnesota to Toledo. And so it would unload in Toledo, and there were a couple of families that lived there throughout the year because their loved ones would come into port once every 2 weeks or so. And then the taconite ore taken from that would go to steel mills in Ohio and northern Kentucky. What should be noted is the Fitzgerald left from Superior, Wisconsin, headed for Zog Island in Detroit, which was not its normal route. And this goes back to, I think, 2 questions ago. It was actually carrying for National Steel. That was the route that National Steel had carried. And the reason why the Fitzgerald was doing that is there was a mutual aid arrangement of sorts among the carrying companies that if they needed a load from up lake, down lake, and they didn't have any equipment up there, if they didn't have a ship, they would contract or they have an agreement with another company to do that. And so that's actually what the Fitzgerald was doing that night. But Ohio, I would say Ohio, Michigan, and to a lesser extent Minnesota were really the top states that were affected by the Fitzgerald more than anyone else.
Tom, your book is available now. Can you tell people where they can get it if they're interested in learning more?
Well, first of all, I'd have to say and give a plug for Coventry Books because they were so kind to have me do a talk on Saturday. You can also go to the Michigan State University Press website and, of course, Amazon. But yes, I'd say first and foremost, do patronize your local bookstores. We need to support them, but it's relatively accessible around the internet.
All right. Tom Nelson, author of Wrecked, The Edmund Fitzgerald and the Sinking of the American Economy, and county executive in Outagamie County in Wisconsin. Thank you very much for being with us on The Sound of Ideas today.
Great to be on. Thank you.